Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, in case you haven't heard already, there are leftist lawmakers there in the state of California who just advanced a controversial piece of legislation which has been promoted as a measure to protect reproductive freedom. Now, just to be clear, the term reproductive freedom, it has nothing to do with the freedom for women to reproduce. Now, instead, reproductive freedom is actually a deceptive term which is used by those who want to give women the full right to abort their unborn baby at any point in time within the pregnancy. And what's even worse is that this new piece of pro-death legislation will actually prohibit the criminal investigation and the possible prosecution of any woman whose pregnancy ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, abortion, or perinatal death. Now, here's how the language of this law actually reads, and I quote, "A person shall not be subject to civil or criminal liability or penalty or otherwise deprived of their rights based on their actions or omissions with respect to their pregnancy or actual, potential, or alleged pregnancy outcome, including miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion, or perinatal death." Okay, so just to be clear here, this law is designed to protect women and abortionists from civil or criminal liabilities or penalties regardless of their actions or their omissions with respect to their pregnancy. So in other words, if a pregnant woman actively causes herself to suffer a miscarriage in some sort of way, well then according to this law, she can't be arrested and she can't be punished. And if a pregnant woman hires a doctor to perform a partial birth abortion, well then according to this law, neither parties can be investigated or prosecuted. What's even worse is that this new law, well, it also allows for the perinatal death of the baby. And just to be clear about this, the word perinatal, it refers to the weeks before and after the birth of a baby. Therefore, this law will actually protect the mother who throws her newborn into a dumpster and lets them die, or who allows her newborn to just simply starve to death in her own home. And for weeks after birth, a woman can allow their baby to die without investigation or prosecution. Now, as we consider the language of this proposed law, it's no wonder that many pro-life groups and attorneys are now warning us that if this bill becomes law, then it'll effectively legalize infanticide there in the state of California. And while I realize that the author of this bill is assuring us that she just wants to prevent pregnant women from being, prosecuted for, either terminating a pregnancy through abortion or the potential loss of their baby, her bill is actually laying the groundwork for the future infanticide there in the state of California. Now, if you think that this could never happen here in America, well, then I would direct your attention to the recent discovery of 5 babies who appeared to have possibly been born alive and then aborted. As a matter of fact, their late gestational ages, as well as their apparent sustained injuries, show potential violations of the Partial Birth Abortion Act, as well as the Born Alive Infants Protection Act. But rather than, examining the tiny corpses found there in Washington, D.C., rather than providing a complete autopsy to see how they died, the D.C. Assistant Police Chief has assured us that the babies appear to have been aborted in accordance with D.C. law, and then assures us that there doesn't appear to be anything criminal about all of this, except for how these babies ended up in the house where they were discovered. And so the D.C. police, they're more concerned about how this medical waste ended up in the possession of a pro-lifer than they are with whether or not any federal laws were actually broken when these 5 fully formed fetuses were terminated. Simply put, they're not really interested in an investigation. They're not really interested in spending the time that it would take to examine the bodies and discover if there's foul play and then punish those who might be guilty of murdering those 5 babies. And listen, if that's not bad enough, let's take a moment to consider the new abortion law there in Colorado. It was actually last Monday when Governor Jared Polis of Colorado signed a bill into law that allows babies to be killed in the womb up until the moment of birth. As he signed this horrific bill, Governor Polis then declared, and I quote, "No matter what the Supreme Court does in the future, people in Colorado will be able to choose when and if they have children. In other words, Governor Polis is going to provide pregnant women with the freedom to terminate their unborn babies, regardless of the possible reversal of Roe v. Wade, which could happen in June as the Supreme Court makes its decision in the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case. But regardless of that decision, Governor Polis has now made it illegal in the state of Colorado to deny, restrict, or interfere with a pregnant woman's right to abort her baby. And in order to justify this new law, the legislation assures us that, and I quote here, a fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus does not have independent or derivative rights under the law of the state. Wow. An unborn baby has no rights in the state of Colorado. With that being the case, a pregnant woman there in Colorado can just simply terminate their unborn baby, and yes, even on the day of delivery. Now, as we consider this new Colorado law, which allows women to abort their babies on the day of delivery, I can't help but to wonder, whatever happened to the viability argument? Remember, when the pro-death crowd assured us that, viability is the basis for applying human rights to a fetus, or in other words, if a baby can't survive outside of their mother's womb, then they would argue that it's not a viable life, and therefore doesn't count as a real person, and therefore has no rights. Okay, that was the argument that they used to use. What these people failed to realize was that medical advancements would quickly narrow the window between conception and viability. For example, it was back in 2016 when an Ohio toddler named Willow was born at 22 weeks gestation. And yet, despite the viability benchmark that has often determined life or death for millions of unborn babies, sweet little Willow, she fought through it, and she ended up proving that a 22-week-old preemie is a viable life. Then there's the Australian preemie named Heather, who was born at only 20 weeks gestation. This, of course, is well before the so-called viability benchmark. And while the doctors informed her father that, Heather would be born brain dead and would have all kinds of health complications for the rest of her life, they were wrong. Heather not only survived, she's thrived as she's developed into a healthy girl who loves life. The fact is this, that there are many, many, many stories just like these that have literally challenged the current benchmark of what's considered viable, right? And it's sad to say that those who want to go out and shout their abortion for all to hear, well, they're kind of giving up on the viability argument. And those people who are quick to celebrate, any laws that provide women with, the freedom to abort their babies, even after the point of viability, well, they've just kind of let go of the viability argument. And the reason why is because the viability argument has been replaced with political talking points that include, the argument that accuses pro-lifers of discriminating against the reproductive rights of women. Okay, so those of us who oppose abortion laws that allow women to abort their unborn babies all the way up to delivery, we're wrong, and not because of the viability argument, but because, we're actually discriminating against women's rights to enjoy reproductive freedom. Now, I must confess that, this is a level of political spin that only a progressive leftist could actually create. Because, listen, it not only portrays the termination of an unborn baby as a reproductive right, but it simultaneously paints every pro-lifer as a person who's actively discriminating against women who, let's not call them women because we can't really define what a woman is. Let's just call them birthing people. Now, listen, I'm no biologist, but I'm pretty sure that in order to be considered a birthing person, the act of giving birth is required. And yet, those who want to exercise their so-called reproductive rights by aborting their babies, they're not birthing people. The reason why is because they're not giving birth. They're ending the life of their baby. So listen, if we can't identify them as women, and they aren't really birthing people, then please help me understand, who am I actually discriminating against? I'm confused. Now listen, as I pointed out in the past, life clearly begins at the moment of fertilization, and it's for this reason that every unborn baby, no matter what stage of development they're in, deserves the full protection of the law against any evil abortion doctor who is making their living ending the lives of the babies they abort. With that being the case, I'm happy to inform you about the Oklahoma lawmakers who just passed a bill on Tuesday that is this bill is going to make it illegal to perform an abortion in the state except in medical emergencies. And those who perform an abortion in Oklahoma, once this bill is signed, they can be fined $100,000. They could possibly spend 10 years in prison. Thankfully, this bill is now headed to the desk of Governor Kevin Stitt, who has already signaled his support for anti-abortion legislation. And with that being the case, this new law could effectively take effect this summer, unless it's blocked by the courts, which chances are there's going to be some of that going on. But let's just keep all of this in prayer. And I should also remind you that, the politics of America, it's influenced by culture. And that's one thing that we have to remember here is that politics is influenced by culture. And with that being the case, every Christian ought to go and influence the culture, the people within our sphere of influence. And one way to do this is by helping the people around us to realize that abortion is not a reproductive right. No, instead, it's a destructive death of an innocent life. And listen, this is not only supported by the science, which proves that life begins at fertilization, but this is also supported by our Creator who created the reproductive process. According to our Creator, the fetus in the womb of every pregnant woman is a living baby who is loved by the Lord. And knowing that the Lord hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood, well, then we ought to help the people around us, those who still support the pro-death position of abortion. We need to help them to understand that there is coming a day when the Lord is going to judge this nation for all of the innocent blood that was shed with every aborted baby. Thankfully, the Lord is ready to forgive those who will repent of their sins and trust in Jesus Christ. And with that being the case, let's go and present every person with the gospel of grace by which sinners can be saved. And as we lead people to the Lord Jesus Christ, we can rejoice in knowing that He's going to empower us with the spiritual courage that we need so that we can continue to fight the good fight of faith and all for the glory of God.